John Podhoretz, no friend of the president, pointed out we struck 85 targets simultaneously in 3 countries, and nobody from the administration sort of pointed out we can do that whenever we want to whomever we want. Did the administration miss the messaging?
It's an interesting point. I think that the message carries itself pretty well in the sense that it played loop to loop, reel to reel, minute to minute on television screens all over the world, on the internet. So the bomb dropping was definitely out there. But yeah, I think it's a fair comment that the administration didn't say, and there's an infinite amount where that came from. The closest I've heard from that was Lloyd Austin, actually, was asked about Houthi capability and Hezbollah capability, and he said, in a very measured way, they have a lot of capability. I have a lot more. But I think we could do more of that kind of overt messaging. Yes, I think that's a fair point.
We're going to come back to the more measured way in a second, because I want to read you the Wall Street Journal headline that posted last night just before 10 p.m. East Coast time. Iran-backed groups continue to target American bases as U.S. plans further strikes. U.S. airstrikes fail to deter Iran's allies as Iraqi militias target base in Syria. So, did Iran get the message?
I would say so far, no. And until we see the cessation of these attacks, both, by the way, up in the north and closely tied to it, the ones in the Red Sea in the south that are disrupting global shipping, until they stop, then Iran has not gotten the message. And we won't know because we can't read the minds of the mullahs. We won't know when that deterrent effect is achieved. My bet is that it will be, Hugh, just based on history. You and I are old enough to remember the late 80s when Iran tried to close the Strait of Hormuz. They used mines. They were attacking commercial shipping, kind of like the Houthis of today, except at the Strait of Hormuz. And we gave them a lot of warnings, and then we essentially sank about a fourth of their Navy in Operation Praying Mantis, and they stopped. I think they will probably ultimately stop here, but we won't be able to measure that. However, to conclude, there's one thing we can measure, and that is how many missiles did we destroy, how many radars, how many command and control nodes, how many fuel depots. We are degrading capability. So there's really 2 parts: the strategic deterrence, that's unfinished business, the tactical degradation of capability, also ongoing. Look for more strikes over the next couple of weeks.
Now, Admiral, you lived the Pentagon life a long time, and you know the Beltway life pretty well. There's a Politico headline. It's the biggest headline. It's the top center in big font. Is Antony Blinken too nice to be Secretary of State? Now, that is usually the Valentine's Day card you get when someone at the White House is trying to push you off the 7th floor of the State Department. How do you read that?
Well, let's put it on a sliding scale that goes from China, who calls their diplomats wolf warriors. I mean, who calls their diplomats wolf warriors? And their diplomats are constantly competing with each other to be the biggest jerks on the planet and say the most arrogant and difficult things to everybody. So put that at one end of the scale. And the other end of the scale is just a Gumby who says yes to everything and is the classic pinstripe, cookie-pushing State Department stereotype. I think Tony Blinken, who I know quite well, is parked right appropriately in the middle. He is a very nice person. He is a gentleman in the best sense of that word. I assure you, when the door closes, he can be extremely direct with both our friends and our opponents. And I've seen him do that, and I'm confident he's in the right place. And to answer the question, no, he's not too nice to be the Secretary of State. I think he's doing a pretty good job.
Now, this brings me back to the moment you said about Lloyd Austin. The only messengers the administration has are the president, the vice president, Secretary of State, and Secretary of Defense. None of them are known as master rhetoricians in the Ronald Reagan mold or even in the W mold in the week after 9/11. Do they need someone who can deliver the sort of message that does, in fact, get the attention of the mullahs?
I think that it would be helpful to have that, and I think, in a sense, you have that from opposition figures, i.e., in our case, from the Republican Party, who are pushing constantly, using very colorful language. People that I count as good defense thinkers, Tom Cotton, Lindsey Graham, and others, Marco Rubio, who talk in very aggressive terms. And I think that gives the administration the space of taking a very, as I said, a very measured approach. However, make no mistake, we are about to hit a point where if we don't get the attention of the mullahs using a pretty measured approach, we're striking proxies, we're striking Iranian Revolutionary Guard, but not inside Iran, then I've been quite public about the view that we're going to have to escalate further, and that's going to require going after Iranian sovereign assets, their warships, their platforms, perhaps targets inside the landmass of Iran itself. So I think that time is coming. The administration, I think, does need to be more aggressive, signaling that to Tehran.
Now, let's talk about Ukraine. I'm glad the border bill is dead, and it's not officially dead yet, but it's cooled to room temperature, and the parrot is dead. But we need to get aid to Israel, to Taiwan, and I am in favor of getting weapons to Ukraine. Ambassador Robert O'Brien, former national security advisor under former President Trump, has suggested, as a way out of the impasse, that we only send hardware. We send weapons, rockets, tanks, ATACMS, planes, no money. That would get through the Republican side. What do you think of that?
I think that's a clever idea, and I'll couple it with the fact that often ignored, by the way, by opponents of Ukraine and opponents of NATO and opponents of Europe in general. European Union just signed up to send $60 billion to Ukraine, almost all cash. So I could see a structure where the U.S. is providing hardware and the Europeans are providing the cash, and I think that makes a lot of sense. Bottom line, I think you and I would both agree it would be an epic failure to allow Vladimir Putin to have his way with Ukraine, and that's what simply stepping away from the problem would do for the United States. Would end up refighting this thing just like we did in the 40s if we ignore what is happening in the comparative 1930s, which is the world
we do agree
today.
Now, Admiral, last question. I'm listening to James Michener's novel Poland, and that's a substitute for actually knowing anything about Poland and learning something quickly. You probably know Poland pretty well, and I've been following developments there. What is their armed services like? Do they have excellent leadership, weaponry, that sort of stuff?
Yes, and they are improving it constantly. And the Poles, as you know, because you're reading the book, have been a battleground for Europe for centuries. European armies have passed back and forth. It's an accident of their geography. They're a flat country in between fractious nations like Russia, France, and others. So they know war very well. And they fought very well and bravely against the Nazis in the late 30s. And their troops in the Second World War, part of a government in exile, fought very bravely as well. In my 4 years as Supreme Allied Commander at NATO, I came to rely on Polish troops. And I'll close with this. In Afghanistan, they sent what they called the White Eagle Brigade, which we put in maybe the hardest place in Afghanistan. And they stood and delivered for the alliance. They're brave, they're capable, and bottom line, they're improving their military constantly right now because they are watching Vladimir Putin and Russian tanks. They are not going to allow their country to fall again.
Thank you, Admiral. I'm up to 1772, and Poland is being partitioned for the first time. And they're clearly great warriors, maybe not so well organized on the government side, but you don't want to fight the Poles when their ire is up. Admiral, thank you. Follow him on X at Stavridis J, and you'll find the Admiral there, and he posts great stuff, and it's always a pleasure. Thank you, Admiral.